In 1983, a federal agency tested the air inside a newly insulated American home and found formaldehyde levels high enough to make the residents physically ill. The insulation was sold as energy efficient and safe. The manufacturer knew it was neither. Here are 30 toxic 1980s items in every home that are now forbidden. Every time you turned on the kitchen faucet in a 1980s home, the water passed through copper pipes joined together with lead-based solder. It was cheap, easy to work with, and had been standard in American plumbing for decades. It was also dissolving into the drinking water. Lead solder released the highest concentrations when water sat still overnight, meaning the first glass poured each morning carried the heaviest dose. The EPA estimated that drinking water accounted for roughly 20% of total lead exposure in young kids during this period. The Safe Drinking Water Act amendments of 1986 finally prohibited lead solder in plumbing connected to public water supplies, but millions of homes built before that date still had it running through every wall. No recall was issued. No one came to replace the pipes. If your house was built before 1986, the solder is likely still there. In 1979, the Consumer Product Safety Commission tested handheld hair dryers sold across the United States and found that many contained asbestos insulation wrapped around their heating elements. Every time the dryer switched on, hot air blew over those components and carried microscopic fibers straight into the lungs of whoever held it. Brands from major manufacturers were affected. The CPSC pushed for voluntary recalls, and most companies phased out asbestos from new models by the early 1980s. But millions of older dryers remained in bathroom drawers for years. There was no mandatory recall, no public warning campaign. The fibers were invisible, and the damage was cumulative. Every morning, people pointed the dryer at their heads and breathed it all in. The pink packets of Sweet and Low sitting on every diner table and kitchen counter in the 1980s carried a small but unmistakable warning. This product contains saccharin, which has been determined to cause cancer in laboratory animals. People read it, shrugged, and stirred the powder into their coffee anyway. The warning had been mandated by Congress since 1977 after studies linked saccharin to bladder tumors in rats. For over 2 decades, Americans consumed a product their own government labeled as a potential carcinogen, because the alternative was sugar and the diet industry was booming. Cumberland Packing Corporation, the maker of Sweet and Low, fought the label for years. It was not removed until the year 2000, when newer research suggested the rat studies were not directly applicable to humans. For the entire 1980s, that cancer warning sat right on the table next to the salt and pepper, and almost nobody stopped using it. The mercury thermometer lived in every American medicine cabinet, a thin glass tube filled with silver liquid that parents shook down and slid under a sick child's tongue. What made it work was elemental mercury, a potent neurotoxin that vaporized at room temperature. When these thermometers broke, and they broke constantly, tiny silver beads scattered across bathroom floors. Kids chased them with their fingers, fascinated by the way the droplets rolled and split apart. The invisible vapor rising from those beads could linger for hours before anyone thought to clean it up. A single thermometer held enough mercury to contaminate the air in a small room above safe exposure limits. No warning labels explained this. No instructions told parents what to do when it shattered. Most states did not begin phasing mercury thermometers out of retail sale until the 2000s. If the mercury in the medicine cabinet was something you could see, the poison beneath the foundation was completely invisible. Chlordane was the most popular termite treatment in America from the late 1940s through 1988, and during that time, roughly 30 million homes were treated with it. Pest control companies injected the chemical directly into the soil beneath concrete slabs, where it created a toxic barrier designed to last 20 years. The problem was that chlordane did not stay in the ground. It vaporized slowly and seeped upward through cracks in foundations, filling living spaces with fumes the EPA later classified as a probable human carcinogen. The chemical had a half-life of up to 30 years in soil. In 1987, the EPA estimated that 52 million Americans were being exposed to chlordane inside their own homes. The agency banned it in 1988, but the residue is still detectable in treated homes decades later. It cost less than $3 at the drugstore. It smelled like artificial flowers and chemical propellant. And every spray was tearing a hole in the ozone layer 10 miles above your head. CFC-powered aerosol cans were everywhere in the 1980s, loaded with chlorofluorocarbons that propelled hairspray, deodorant, furniture polish, and oven cleaner. By the mid-1970s, more than 5 billion aerosol cans were produced annually in the United States alone. Chemists Sherwood Rowland and Mario Molina had warned as early as 1974 that CFCs were destroying stratospheric ozone, but the chemical industry dismissed the findings as inconclusive. The U.S. banned CFCs in consumer aerosols in 1978, yet they remained legal in refrigerators, air conditioners, and foam insulation well into the decade. The Montreal Protocol of 1987 finally committed the world to a full phase-out. By then, a measurable hole had already opened over Antarctica. During the energy crisis, homeowners were desperate to cut heating bills, and urea formaldehyde foam insulation seemed like the answer. Contractors mixed the resin on site, pumped it through small holes into wall cavities, and let it expand and harden. It was effective, affordable, and fast. It also released formaldehyde gas as it cured, and in many cases, it never stopped. The CPSC received more than 2,200 complaints involving over 5,700 people who reported eye irritation, chronic headaches, nausea, and difficulty breathing. In 1982, the agency banned UFFI for use in homes and schools, calling it an unreasonable risk based on formaldehyde's carcinogenic potential. An estimated 500,000 American homes had already been filled with it. A federal court overturned the ban in 1983 on procedural grounds, but the industry had already collapsed. The formaldehyde, sealed inside the walls, continued to off-gas for years in homes where nobody knew what was making them sick. Dursban was the brand name for chlorpyrifos, an organophosphate pesticide manufactured by Dow Chemical and registered for home termite control in 1980. It quickly became one of the most commonly used indoor pesticides in the country, sprayed along baseboards, pumped into wall voids, and applied to lawns where kids played barefoot. Organophosphates work by disrupting the nervous system of insects, but they affect humans the same way at higher exposure levels. The sharp chemical smell lingered for days after application, and residue settled into carpets where toddlers crawled and put their hands in their mouths. Dow marketed it aggressively to homeowners and pest control operators alike. It took until the year 2000 for the EPA to announce a deal with manufacturers pulling nearly all residential uses off the market, citing risks to children as the driving concern. If you climbed into an attic in the 1980s and saw loose, grayish-brown pebbles spread between the joists, you were looking at vermiculite insulation. About 70% of all vermiculite sold in the United States came from a single mine near Libby, Montana, operated by the W.R. Grace Company. That mine was contaminated with tremolite asbestos. Sold under the brand name Zonolite, the insulation went into an estimated 35 million American attics. Homeowners poured it by the bag with no protective equipment, sending clouds of dust and invisible fibers into the air. Grace knew about the contamination for years and suppressed the information. Hundreds of Libby residents developed asbestos-related diseases. In 2002, the EPA declared the town a Superfund site, but the insulation remains in millions of attics across the country, undisturbed and unremoved. Your parents filled the tank every week, and the exhaust pipe pumped lead directly into the air your family breathed. Leaded gasoline had been standard in America since the 1920s, when General Motors and Standard Oil introduced tetraethyllead as an anti-knock additive. The health risks were documented almost immediately, but the petroleum industry spent decades dismissing the evidence. The phase-out began in the mid-1970s, but leaded fuel was not fully banned in the United States until 1996, meaning it was still available at pumps throughout the entire decade. Lead settled into soil along every highway, driveway, and school parking lot in the country, where it remains today. Researchers later estimated that childhood lead exposure from gasoline during this era lowered the collective IQ of an entire generation of Americans. No company that profited from it was ever held fully accountable. The lead was in the gasoline and the pipes, but the carcinogen on the kitchen counter came disguised as the healthiest snack a parent could offer. Alar was the trade name for dimenazide, a growth regulator sprayed on apple trees to improve color and keep fruit from dropping before harvest. Uniroyal Chemical Company had sold it since 1968, and by the 1980s it was applied to a large share of the American apple crop. When heated during processing into juice or applesauce, Alar broke down into UDMH, a compound the EPA classified as a probable human carcinogen. The agency had known about the risk since the early 1980s, but dragged its feet. In February 1989, CBS's 60 Minutes aired a segment called A is for Apple, featuring a skull and crossbones over a red apple. Schools pulled apples from cafeteria menus overnight. Uniroyal pulled Alar from the market later that year, and the EPA formally banned its food uses. The kitchen floor you walked across barefoot every morning may have been made of asbestos. Standard 9x9-inch vinyl floor tiles produced through the 1970s routinely contained chrysotile asbestos mixed into the vinyl for durability and fire resistance. Some tiles held as much as 70% asbestos by weight. The black mastic adhesive used to glue them down often contained it as well. As long as the tiles stayed intact, the fibers remained locked inside. But tiles crack, chip, and wear down, and anyone who scraped up old flooring during a renovation sent asbestos fibers directly into the air of their home. Millions of these tiles were still in place throughout the 1980s, and millions more remain in older homes today. No federal law has ever required their removal. Official guidance was simply to leave them alone, cover them over, and hope they held together. Carbon tetrachloride was once sold in hardware stores and supermarkets as a common spot remover and household degreaser. It came in small bottles with cheerful labels, and people used it to clean grease stains from clothing, upholstery, and garage floors. The liquid evaporated quickly and left no residue, which made it popular. What it left behind was invisible, a dense vapor that sank to the floor and accumulated in poorly ventilated rooms. Breathing it caused dizziness, nausea, and in prolonged exposure, severe liver and kidney damage. The EPA classified carbon tetrachloride as a probable human carcinogen. Consumer sales were phased out during the 1980s after the dangers became impossible to downplay. But for decades before that, it had been as common under the kitchen sink as dish soap. No protective gloves were included. No ventilation was recommended on the label. You just poured it on the stain and rubbed. In 1981, the FDA approved aspartame for use in dry foods, and by 1983, the sweetener was everywhere. In diet sodas, sugar-free gum, tabletop packets sold under the brand names NutraSweet and Equal, and over 6,000 consumer products worldwide. G.D. Searle, the pharmaceutical company that manufactured it, had pushed for approval for nearly a decade, surviving a pause in 1974 when concerns arose about brain tumors in laboratory animals. When aspartame breaks down in the body, it produces methanol, which converts into formaldehyde, a known carcinogen, in small amounts. The FDA maintained that the quantities were far too low to pose a risk, but internal controversy over the approval process persisted for years. In 1985, Monsanto purchased G.D. Searle and turned NutraSweet into one of the most profitable food additive brands in history. Aspartame remains approved and widely consumed today, though the WHO classified it as possibly carcinogenic to humans in 2023. Before chlordane was pulled from the market, another organophosphate was already taking its place in American homes. Diazinon was the go-to pesticide for fleas, ants, and garden insects throughout the 1970s and 80s. Homeowners sprayed it on lawns, along fence lines, around pet bedding, and directly onto indoor surfaces where insects traveled. Like all organophosphates, diazinon works by inhibiting cholinesterase, an enzyme essential for proper nervous system function, in insects and in people. The EPA found that it was showing up in rivers and streams at levels toxic to birds and aquatic life, and exposure reports from homeowners included headaches, blurred vision, and muscle weakness. It remained on store shelves for residential use until 2004, more than 2 decades after the warning signs were clear. During the 1980s, you could buy it at any garden center without a license, mix it in a bucket, and spray it across your yard while your kids played 10 feet away. The federal ban on lead paint in residential use took effect in 1978, but it did not magically remove the millions of lead-painted items already in American homes. Throughout the 1980s, toddlers slept in cribs coated with paint that contained lead, chewed on wooden toys finished with it, and pressed their mouths against windowsills thick with decades of lead-based layers. The paint tasted sweet, which made it more attractive to young kids, not less. Hand-me-down furniture passed between households carried the old finishes with it, and nobody tested them. Imported toys from countries without lead restrictions continued to arrive on American shelves with no screening process in place. The Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act of 2008 finally set strict lead limits for all products intended for kids, but that was 30 years after the original paint ban. An entire generation of toddlers had already been exposed. Look up in any home built before 1980, and you might be staring at asbestos. Spray-on textured ceiling coatings, commonly called popcorn ceilings, were applied in millions of American homes from the 1950s through the late 1970s. The bumpy texture was popular because it hid imperfections and dampened sound, but the spray mixture frequently contained chrysotile asbestos as a binding agent. The EPA banned asbestos in spray-on ceiling treatments in 1978, yet every home that already had it was left untouched. Scraping off a popcorn ceiling during a renovation, a weekend project that homeowners tackled constantly through the 1980s, released a blizzard of fine dust loaded with asbestos fibers. No federal law required testing before removal. No warning labels were posted on the ceilings themselves. The material just sat there, flaking slowly, shedding fibers every time something bumped against it. The wood grain paneling that covered basement walls and den ceilings across suburban America in the 1980s was not actually wood. It was particle board and plywood bonded together with urea formaldehyde resin, and it released formaldehyde gas into the room for years after installation. The same chemical was in the pressed wood shelving, the cabinets, the subflooring, and the cheap furniture sold at department stores everywhere. A 1985 study found that mobile homes, which used large quantities of pressed wood products in tight spaces with poor ventilation, had indoor formaldehyde levels several times higher than conventional houses. Residents reported burning eyes, sore throats, and persistent headaches. The Department of Housing and Urban Development did not set formaldehyde emission standards for composite wood products until 2016, more than 3 decades after the health complaints began. Until then, the paneling kept off gassing, and everyone kept breathing. In the 1980s, tanning salons spread across strip malls and shopping centers like fast food chains, promising a year-round golden glow for a few dollars per session. The beds used high-intensity ultraviolet lamps that delivered concentrated UV radiation directly to exposed skin, often with no timer limits, no eye protection requirements, and no age restrictions. Teenagers walked in after school, paid cash, and climbed into a coffin-shaped machine that bombarded their skin with radiation levels far exceeding natural sunlight. There was no federal regulation of tanning beds during this period. Individual states set their own rules, and most set none at all. The World Health Organization did not classify UV tanning devices as Group 1 carcinogens, the same category as tobacco and asbestos, until 2009. By then, an entire generation had treated indoor tanning as a harmless beauty routine. Most of those beds are still legal today. The humming, fluorescent lights hanging in kitchens, garages, and basement workshops across America contained a component that almost nobody knew about. The ballast, a small metal box mounted inside the fixture, regulated the electrical current flowing to the tubes. In fixtures manufactured before 1979, those ballasts were filled with polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, a class of industrial chemicals that the EPA later classified as probable human carcinogens. When the ballasts aged and overheated, They leaked a dark, oily fluid that dripped onto ceiling tiles, countertops, and floors below. The smell was acrid and chemical. PCB manufacturing was banned in 1979 under the Toxic Substances Control Act, but the fixtures themselves were never recalled. They stayed in place for decades, quietly leaking. An estimated 650 million PCB containing light ballasts remained in use across the country well into the 2000s. The EPA classified PCBs as persistent organic pollutants, chemicals that do not break down and accumulate in human tissue over time. They were sold in toy departments and sporting goods stores as a backyard family game. Lawn darts, marketed under the brand name Jarts, were foot-long metal-tipped projectiles designed to be thrown underhand toward a plastic ring on the ground. The tips were weighted steel, sharp enough to pierce a lawn on impact. Between 1970 and 1987, emergency rooms across the country treated an estimated 6,700 lawn dart injuries, 3/4 of them involving kids under 15. In 1987, 7-year-old Michelle Snow of Riverside, California, was struck in the head by a lawn dart thrown in a neighbor's yard. She did not survive. Her father, David Snow, spent the next year fighting for a federal ban, and in 1988, the CPSC finally prohibited the sale of lawn darts with metal tips. The ban came 18 years after the FDA had first flagged them as a mechanical hazard. For nearly 2 decades, the industry argued they were safe if used as directed. The wooden fence posts, deck boards, and playground structures in backyards across the 1980s were often treated with pentachlorophenol, a chemical wood preservative known simply as penta. It kept wood from rotting and repelled termites, which made it popular for any outdoor lumber that touched the ground. Penta also contained dioxin as a manufacturing contaminant, one of the most toxic synthetic chemicals ever produced. The greenish tint on treated wood was a visible marker, but most homeowners had no idea what the color meant. Kids climbed on penta-treated play structures, gripped the wood with bare hands, and sometimes pressed their faces against it. In 1984, the EPA restricted pentachlorophenol to certified commercial applicators only, removing it from consumer sale. But the wood it had already treated stayed in yards, playgrounds, and public parks for years afterward, weathering slowly and leaching chemicals into the soil where people gathered. In the 1980s, there was no escape from cigarette smoke. It filled offices, airplanes, hospital waiting rooms, grocery stores, and the back seats of cars with the windows rolled up. Restaurants had smoking sections separated from non-smoking tables by nothing more than a few feet of open air. There were no federal laws restricting indoor smoking during this decade. The Surgeon General's 1986 report confirmed that secondhand smoke caused lung cancer in non-smokers, but the tobacco industry spent millions challenging the findings. An estimated 54,000 Americans were dying each year from secondhand smoke exposure alone. Indoor smoking bans did not begin spreading across the country until the 1990s, and even then the progress was slow, state by state, city by city, against fierce industry opposition. Homeowners in the 1980s bought used railroad ties by the truckload and stacked them into garden borders, retaining walls and raised vegetable beds. The ties were cheap, heavy, and weatherproof, which made them a favorite for weekend landscaping projects. They were also saturated with creosote, a thick, dark, oily wood preservative distilled from coal tar. The smell was sharp and unmistakable, a heavy, acrid odor that clung to your hands and never fully faded, even after years of weathering in the ground. Creosote contains hundreds of chemical compounds, including polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and the EPA classifies it as a probable human carcinogen. Direct skin contact with fresh creosote caused burns and rashes that took weeks to heal. The chemical leached steadily into surrounding soil, and people who built raised garden beds with railroad ties grew tomatoes, peppers, and lettuce in contaminated dirt their kids ate from all summer. The EPA eventually restricted creosote to commercial and industrial use only, but nobody came to collect the ties already sitting in backyards across the country. Every weekend mechanic who changed his own brake pads in the 1980s was breathing asbestos. Brake pads and shoes manufactured during this era contained chrysotile asbestos to withstand the extreme heat generated by friction. When a home mechanic pulled a wheel off and blew the brake dust out of the drum with compressed air, a common practice at the time, a visible cloud of fine gray powder filled the garage. That dust was loaded with asbestos fibers. There was no warning on the packaging. Auto parts stores sold them over the counter without mentioning the contents. The exposure repeated itself every time brakes were serviced, and in a household where the car was maintained at home, that could mean several times a year. Asbestos in brake products was not fully restricted until the EPA's 2024 final rule, more than 4 decades after the risk was established. The lead crystal decanter sitting on the dining room sideboard was a status symbol in the 1980s, a heavy, beautifully cut piece of glassware used to serve wine, whiskey, and port at dinner parties and holiday gatherings. What made the crystal sparkle was lead oxide, mixed into the glass at concentrations of up to 35% by weight. When acidic liquids like wine or fruit juice sat in a lead crystal container, the lead leached directly into the drink. A study published in The Lancet in 1991 found that wine stored in a lead crystal decanter for just 4 months reached lead concentrations over 5 times the EPA's safe drinking water standard. The longer the liquid sat, the higher the levels climbed. Brandy stored in crystal for over 5 years reached levels that would have triggered an immediate health advisory if found in tap water. The FDA issued a warning against storing beverages in lead crystal, but no ban was ever imposed. Lead crystal is still sold today, and vintage sets from the 1980s remain in regular use. Ethylene dibromide, known as EDB, was a pesticide used to fumigate grain in storage silos, and its residue wound up in cereal, bread, flour, and cake mixes on kitchen shelves across America. The EPA classified it as a probable human carcinogen after animal studies showed tumors of the stomach, liver, and reproductive organs. In 1983, EDB was detected in groundwater in several states, and testing of retail food products revealed alarming residue levels. The EPA issued an emergency suspension of EDB for grain fumigation in February 1984, one of the fastest regulatory actions the agency had ever taken. But for years before that order, the chemical had been quietly cycling through the American food supply, absorbed into the bread that sat on every breakfast table. In 1977, the Consumer Product Safety Commission banned trice, a flame-retardant chemical applied to children's sleepwear, after studies showed it caused cancer in laboratory animals and was absorbed through the skin of kids who wore the treated fabric. But the ban covered only that single compound. Throughout the 1980s, manufacturers switched to other brominated and chlorinated flame retardants to meet federal flammability standards for children's pajamas, and many of those replacement chemicals were later found to be harmful as well. Kids wore these treated fabrics against their skin for 8 to 10 hours every night, and the chemicals migrated out of the material through sweat and friction. The residue accumulated in household dust, in bedding, and in the bloodstreams of the kids who wore them. It took decades for researchers to document the effects of the replacement compounds, and by then, a generation had already slept in them every single night of their childhood. When you picked up your dry cleaning in the 1980s, the clothes came wrapped in thin plastic and still carried the faint, sweet chemical smell of the solvent used to clean them. That solvent was perchloroethylene, known as PERC, a chlorinated hydrocarbon the EPA classifies as a likely human carcinogen. People hung freshly cleaned suits, dresses, and coats in bedroom closets where the residual PERC vapors slowly off-gassed into the air of the room where they slept. The International Agency for Research on Cancer has linked long-term PERC exposure to bladder cancer, non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and multiple myeloma. Dry cleaning workers face the highest risk, but studies also found elevated PERC levels in apartments located above or beside dry cleaning shops. PERC remains the dominant solvent in much of the industry today, and most Americans who wore dry-cleaned clothes in the 1980s had no idea what they were sealing in their closet each week. On nightstands across America, alarm clocks with softly glowing dials sat inches from the faces of sleeping people. The glow came from radium-226, a radioactive element mixed with phosphorescent paint and applied to the numbers and hands of timepieces manufactured from the 1920s through the 1960s. By the 1980s, millions of these clocks were still in use, passed down through generations, or picked up at garage sales for a few dollars. Radium decays with a half-life of 1,600 years, meaning a clock made in 1940 was just as radioactive in 1985 as the day it left the factory. Over time, the paint dried, cracked, and flaked, releasing radioactive particles into bedroom air. The danger had been known since the 1920s, when the radium girls, young women who painted watch dials and licked their brushes to form a fine point, developed radiation poisoning and bone cancer. Despite that history, no one recalled the products those workers made. Nobody knocked on your door to say the clock on your nightstand had been emitting radiation while you slept. Asbestos-backed vinyl floor tiles covered kitchens, bathrooms, and basements in countless 1980s homes, their durability and affordability making them the go-to choice for practical families. The tiles came in cheerful patterns that brightened rooms, and they resisted water, stains, and heavy foot traffic better than almost anything available. Hidden beneath the colorful surface was a layer of asbestos backing that gave tiles their famous strength. Families walked across these floors barefoot, mopped them weekly, and never imagined the material underfoot could be dangerous. The asbestos remained stable as long as tiles stayed intact, but scratching, cracking, or removal released microscopic fibers into the air. Homeowners who pulled up old flooring themselves often did so without masks, inhaling clouds of invisible particles. When health risks of asbestos became undeniable, regulations required professional abatement and safe disposal. Many families discovered their floors were hazardous only when preparing to sell or remodel their homes. The cheerful tiles that seemed so practical now required expensive removal procedures. They remain a stark reminder that danger sometimes lies directly beneath our feet. Des-treated beef and veal arrived on dinner tables across the country during the 1980s without anyone suspecting the danger hidden inside every tender bite. Diethylstilbestrol was a synthetic hormone implanted in cattle to accelerate growth, helping animals bulk up faster and reach market weight with less feed. Ranchers loved the efficiency, and consumers enjoyed lower prices without questioning how those savings were achieved. Families grilled steaks, roasted roasts, and served veal cutlets, believing they were providing wholesome protein. But DES had a horrifying history that should have raised alarms, because the same hormone given to pregnant women to prevent miscarriage caused devastating cancers in their children decades later. When researchers connected DES residues in meat to similar risks, shockwaves hit the agricultural industry. Regulators banned the hormone from livestock production, but damage to public confidence was immense. People looked at their freezers filled with beef and wondered what they had already consumed. It remains one of the clearest examples of how shortcuts in food production can carry consequences lasting for generations. Deviled ham spread was one of those pantry staples that every family seemed to keep tucked behind the canned vegetables, ready to be slathered on crackers or bread whenever a quick lunch was needed. The little cans with their cheerful devil mascot promised something savory, easy, and perfectly portable for a child's lunchbox. Mothers scooped it out without hesitation, spreading it across sandwiches and believing it was a harmless protein source that kept well and tasted good enough to satisfy picky eaters. But the ingredient list told a different story, one loaded with sodium nitrite and preservatives designed to keep the meat looking pink long after it had been sealed inside that tiny metal container. People trusted these products because they had been around for generations, because grandmothers had served them. Researchers eventually connected sodium nitrite to compounds linked to cancer risks, casting a shadow over products once considered wholesome. The truth arrived slowly, filtering through scientific journals before reaching kitchen tables where the damage had already been done. It is unsettling to think that a spread so familiar quietly carried risks that took decades to understand. Mercury-filled tilt switches inside wall thermostats were the silent heartbeat of temperature control in 1980s homes, clicking softly whenever furnaces kicked on or air conditioning started humming. Inside each small glass capsule was a bead of liquid mercury that rolled back and forth, completing the electrical circuit that kept families comfortable. People adjusted these thermostats daily without knowing they were handling devices containing one of the most toxic heavy metals on Earth. If a thermostat broke during replacement, that tiny mercury bead could spill onto floors and vents, vaporizing slowly into the air for years. Families breathed it in without realizing the source, and children sometimes played with the shiny liquid if they found it. Once scientists documented how mercury accumulated in bodies and damaged nervous systems, regulators moved quickly to phase out these switches. Homeowners were urged to dispose of them through hazardous waste programs. The ban brought safer digital alternatives, but the memory of those toxic capsules lingers as a warning about comfort and danger sharing the same wall. Lead-soldered canned foods were pantry staples throughout the 1980s, stacked in neat rows of soups, vegetables, fruits, and baby foods that families relied on for convenience. The seams of those cans were sealed with lead solder, a technique standard in manufacturing for decades. Nobody questioned it because canned food represented safety, preservation, and modern efficiency. Parents heated these products for quick dinners, packed them in lunches, and spooned them into the mouths of infants without any hesitation. But lead does not stay locked in metal. It leaches slowly into food inside, especially when contents are acidic, like tomatoes or citrus. Children absorb this heavy metal with every bite, accumulating toxins that damage developing brains and nervous systems. When scientists connected widespread lead exposure to canned food consumption, evidence was damning. Federal regulations eventually banned lead solder in food packaging, but countless families had already consumed years of contaminated meals. Looking back, it is chilling to realize that cans meant to nourish instead quietly poisoned an entire generation. Kool-Aid was the magic powder that turned ordinary tap water into something sweet, colorful, and endlessly exciting for children who measured summer afternoons by how many glasses they could drink. The packets were cheap, the flavors endless, and the bright reds and purples made every glass look like a party waiting to happen. Mothers mixed it by the gallon, trusting that something so popular must be safe for growing children. But some of those vivid colors came from red dye number 2, a synthetic colorant that would become one of the most controversial food additives of the decade. Studies emerged suggesting potential links to cancer, prompting the FDA to ban the dye entirely in 1976. Families who had poured countless glasses of cherry Kool-Aid realized their children had been consuming something regulators now considered dangerous. The ban came after years of use, leaving parents to wonder how much exposure their families had accumulated. Today, the memory of those bright red drinks carries a shadow that cheerful packaging never hinted at. It is troubling to think that something tied to childhood joy contained a colorant deemed unfit for consumption. Lead-glazed ceramic coffee mugs sat proudly in kitchen cupboards throughout the 1980s, their colorful finishes and handcrafted charm making them favorites for morning rituals. Many came from overseas markets or craft fairs where artisans used traditional glazing techniques passed down through generations. What nobody realized was that lead in those beautiful glazes slowly dissolved into hot acidic beverages like coffee and citrus juice. Every morning sip delivered invisible doses of a neurotoxin that accumulated in bones and bloodstreams over time. Families collected these mugs as souvenirs and everyday essentials, never suspecting the vessel holding their comfort drink carried serious risk. Children drank hot cocoa from colorful cups, absorbing lead at levels that affected developing brains severely. When testing revealed dangerously high lead content in imported ceramics, regulators cracked down on manufacturing standards. Many beloved mugs were quietly discarded once families understood the truth. The ban protected future generations, but those who spent years drinking from contaminated cups wondered what damage had accumulated. It remains a reminder that beauty and danger sometimes share the same glaze. Ethylene dibromide fumigated flour sat in pantries and bakery stockrooms across the country during the 1980s, quietly contaminating bread, cakes, cookies, and pastries that families trusted as perfectly safe. The chemical was used to fumigate stored grain, killing insects and preventing infestations that could ruin entire harvests. Farmers and processors saw it as essential protection, a modern solution to ancient problems of spoilage and pest damage. Nobody thought twice about what happened when fumigated grains were milled into flour and shipped to grocery stores. But ethylene dibromide did not simply vanish during processing. Residues remained in finished products, and researchers discovered the chemical was a confirmed carcinogen capable of causing serious harm with repeated exposure. When the EPA banned the fumigant, the announcement sent ripples through the entire grain industry. Bakers, millers, and consumers questioned everything on their shelves. It was a jarring reminder that contamination can travel invisibly from field to fork, and that even bread, the most basic food, could carry dangers nobody saw coming. White bread in the 1970s was the foundation of nearly every packed lunch, soft and pillowy and perfectly sliced to hold whatever filling a mother decided her child needed that day. Nobody questioned what made it so fluffy, so uniform, or so reliably spongy compared to the denser loaves of earlier generations. Families trusted the brands they saw on television, believing that mass production meant quality and safety. But many of those beloved loaves contained potassium bromate, a chemical additive that helped strengthen the dough and create that signature airy texture. Bakers loved it because it made bread rise higher and look more appealing on store shelves. What families did not know was that potassium bromate had been linked to kidney damage and other health issues in laboratory studies conducted far from cheerful kitchens. Other countries eventually banned it entirely, recognizing the risks that American regulators were slower to address. Today, it is jarring to realize that the soft white bread cradling a child's sandwich once contained a compound many nations refuse to allow near food production. Polychlorinated biphenyl filled fluorescent light ballasts hummed quietly in ceilings throughout the 1980s, providing steady illumination in kitchens, basements, and garages without drawing attention. The ballasts regulated electrical current to keep tubes flickering evenly, and the PCB oil inside helped dissipate heat while preventing fires. Families rarely thought about what was hidden inside metal housings bolted above their heads. But when ballasts aged and overheated, they often leaked, dripping oily residue onto surfaces below without anyone noticing. Some leaked slowly for years, creating invisible contamination zones on countertops, shelves, and floors. The PCBs did not evaporate easily. They clung to dust particles and spread through ventilation systems, accumulating in carpets throughout the home. When scientists confirmed that PCBs caused cancer and disrupted hormones, the manufacturing ban was swift, but millions of ballasts already installed remained in place. Families discovered the danger only when fixtures failed or during renovations. Cleanup required specialized procedures and protective equipment. Today, those old ballasts stand as proof that even simple overhead lights can harbor secrets. Brominated vegetable oil lurked inside the citrus-flavored sodas and fruit drinks of the 1980s, keeping bright colors evenly distributed instead of floating to the top like an oily film. The additive was originally developed as a flame retardant, a detail that seems almost impossible to believe given how casually it appeared in beverages marketed to children and families. Manufacturers valued it for keeping drinks looking consistent and appealing on store shelves. Kids guzzled orange sodas, lemon-lime concoctions, and fruity punches without any idea that a chemical designed to stop fires swirled through every sip. But bromine accumulates in the body, building up in fatty tissues and potentially causing neurological harm with prolonged exposure. When researchers raised alarms about long-term effects, regulators around the world took notice. Many countries banned brominated vegetable oil entirely, and major beverage companies eventually reformulated products under public pressure. The additive that once seemed like harmless convenience became one of the strangest examples of industrial chemicals finding their way into the food supply. Oscar Mayer wieners were the hot dogs that defined childhood cookouts, school lunches, and quick dinners when nobody felt like cooking anything complicated. The jingle was famous, the packaging was cheerful, and the taste was exactly what kids expected from a hot dog. Mothers sliced them into thermoses of beans, tucked them into buns with ketchup, or cut them into little coins that children happily stabbed with forks. But the ingredient list told a more complicated story, one filled with mechanically separated meat, sodium nitrite, corn syrup, and fillers that made the actual meat content questionable at best. People trusted the brand because it had been around for generations, because commercials made everything seem wholesome. What families did not realize was that the preservatives and processing methods used to create that uniform texture came with health trade-offs nobody discussed. When researchers began connecting processed meats to health risks, the industry faced pressure to reformulate. Today, those cheerful packages feel like relics from an era when trust in food brands outweighed curiosity about what was actually inside. Lead-painted wooden Venetian blinds hung in bedroom windows and living room bays throughout the 1980s, elegant fixtures nobody questioned or worried about. Families tilted the slats to let morning light in or shut them tight against afternoon sun, never realizing every tug of the cord released toxic dust into the air. The lead in the paint made finishes durable and resistant to chipping, which manufacturers advertised as a selling point for busy households. Children pressed their faces against the slats to peek outside, running fingers along painted surfaces while parents called them to dinner. Over time, the paint degraded invisibly, shedding particles onto windowsills, carpets, and the hands of everyone who touched them. Researchers eventually connected these blinds to alarming blood lead levels in children, prompting urgent recalls and immediate regulatory action. Families were stunned to learn something so ordinary had been contaminating their homes for years. The bans arrived swiftly once evidence mounted, forcing manufacturers to reformulate and homeowners to replace what they had trusted. Today, those vintage blinds serve as a quiet reminder that danger sometimes hangs in plain sight. Mercury-laden swordfish and tuna were prized catches on dinner tables throughout the 1980s, served as elegant steaks at restaurants and sliced into sandwiches for everyday lunches. These large, predatory fish were celebrated for their firm texture, rich flavor, and reputation as healthy protein sources loaded with omega fatty acids. Families ordered them proudly at seafood counters, grilled them at backyard barbecues, and packed tuna salad into lunchboxes without any hesitation. The ocean seemed like an endless source of pure, natural food, untouched by the contamination problems plaguing land-based agriculture. But mercury accumulates in fish that eat smaller fish, concentrating as it moves up the food chain until top predators carry levels dangerous to human health. Pregnant women, children, and frequent consumers were especially vulnerable to neurological damage that could take years to manifest. When testing revealed how contaminated these popular fish had become, regulators issued consumption advisories that shocked families who thought they were eating healthy. Today, strict warnings limit how often these fish should appear on anyone's plate. Kraft singles were the cheese slices that defined convenience in the 1970s, each one wrapped in its own plastic sleeve and ready to be peeled apart and placed on sandwiches without any slicing or mess. Mothers loved how easy they made lunch preparation, how uniformly they melted on burgers, and how eagerly children accepted them. The bright orange squares looked like cheese, tasted like cheese, and fit perfectly on white bread alongside a slice of bologna. What families did not realize was that these slices were technically labeled as pasteurized prepared cheese product, a distinction that hinted at the heavy processing involved. Emulsifiers, sodium phosphates, and other additives helped achieve that perfectly smooth texture and unnaturally long shelf life. People trusted the familiar packaging without reading fine print that revealed how far these slices had traveled from actual cheese. Health debates later emerged about processed foods in childhood nutrition, but by then generations had grown up believing plastic-wrapped singles were normal. Today, those individually wrapped slices feel like a symbol of an era when convenience mattered more than questioning what made it possible. Cadmium-pigmented orange Fiestaware sat in china cabinets and on dinner tables throughout the 1980s, its bold, radioactive orange glaze making it a beloved collector's item and everyday dinnerware. The color came from cadmium sulfide and selenium compounds that gave the finish its characteristic brightness, a vibrancy no other pigment could match. Families served holiday meals and children's snacks on these plates without knowing the glaze was not stable. Acidic foods like tomato sauce and citrus fruits slowly leached cadmium from the surface, delivering invisible doses of toxic heavy metal with every bite. Collectors displayed pieces proudly, unaware that handling them transferred contamination to hands that later touched food. When testing revealed vintage orange Fiestaware could expose users to dangerous cadmium levels, the original formula was discontinued and warnings spread through collector communities. Many families packed away dishes they had cherished for generations, uncertain whether to keep them or dispose of them. The bright orange plates became symbols of how beauty and toxicity share the same glaze. Today, they serve as colorful reminders that even cheerful dinnerware can hide dangers. Red dye number 3 colored the candies, cereals, and desserts of the 1980s in shades of bright cherry and festive pink that children adored without hesitation. It made maraschino cherries glow atop ice cream sundaes, turned fruit snacks into jewel-toned treats, and gave holiday cookies their signature festive look. Parents bought these products without a second thought, assuming anything sold on grocery shelves must be safe. But researchers discovered something troubling when laboratory studies connected the dye to thyroid tumors in animals, raising alarm about what it might do inside human bodies. The FDA banned red dye number 3 from cosmetics, yet the additive lingered in certain foods under older approvals that seemed impossible to untangle. Families who remembered eating handfuls of those bright red candies began questioning what else slipped past safety checks. The controversy sparked lasting debates about artificial colors in the food supply. Looking back, those vivid reds and pinks carry a complicated legacy, a symbol of an era when color mattered more than caution and danger hid behind cheerful packaging. Lunchables arrived in the late 1980s, but quickly became the evolution of everything the 70s lunchbox represented, prepackaged convenience taken to its logical extreme. Children loved the tiny compartments filled with crackers, processed meat, and cheese, feeling grown up as they assembled their own miniature meals. Parents embraced them because they eliminated morning preparation, offering a grab-and-go solution for busy families who trusted that anything sold for children must be safe. But the sodium levels packed into those small plastic trays would shock nutritionists who measured how much salt a single serving contained. Children consumed these compact meals believing they were eating something harmless, never realizing that crackers, meat, and cheese combined delivered salt loads exceeding what health guidelines recommended. The convenient portions masked how concentrated the sodium truly was, contributing to concerns about childhood blood pressure and long-term health. Manufacturers eventually faced pressure to reduce salt, but only after years of products that prioritized shelf stability over balance. The convenience parents trusted came with consequences. Formaldehyde-treated plywood kitchen cabinets lined the walls of countless homes in the 1980s, their smooth surfaces and affordable prices making them popular for families upgrading cooking spaces. The glue holding wood layers together contained formaldehyde resins that cured slowly over months, releasing invisible gas into kitchens where families spent hours each day. People cooked meals, ate breakfast, and helped children with homework while breathing fumes they could not smell at low concentrations. Some families noticed headaches, irritated eyes, or persistent coughs without connecting symptoms to their new cabinets. The formaldehyde levels were highest when cabinets were new, but off-gassing continued for years, especially in warm kitchens where windows stayed closed. When researchers published findings linking chronic exposure to respiratory illness and cancer risks, the construction industry faced immediate pressure. Regulators set strict limits on formaldehyde emissions, forcing manufacturers to reformulate adhesives entirely. Families who had proudly remodeled their kitchens wondered what they had been breathing. Those cabinets became symbols of how progress can poison the spaces meant to nourish us. Sulfite-preserved restaurant salad bars were the crown jewels of casual dining in the 1980s. Those long, gleaming counters overflowing with crisp lettuce, vegetables, and toppings that seemed impossibly fresh. Families lined up with plates in hand, thrilled by endless variety and the illusion of healthy eating. What diners did not realize was that many restaurants sprayed produce with sulfite solutions to keep everything looking vibrant long past its natural shelf life. The chemicals stopped browning and allowed vegetables to sit under heat lamps for hours without wilting. It seemed like a miracle of food science. but sulfites triggered severe reactions in certain people, especially those with asthma, causing breathing difficulties and, in tragic cases, death. Reports of allergic emergencies mounted until regulators could no longer ignore the pattern. The FDA banned sulfite sprays on fresh fruits and vegetables served raw, forcing restaurants to rethink salad bar practices entirely. That gleaming buffet of the past carries a shadow most people never knew existed, a reminder that freshness can sometimes be a dangerous illusion. Hostess fruit pies were the sugary treasures that turned an ordinary lunchbox into something worth bragging about on the playground. Kids loved peeling back the cellophane to reveal those golden crusts dusted with glaze, filled with gooey apple, cherry, or lemon filling that tasted like pure happiness. Parents bought them believing they were harmless treats, small rewards tucked beside the sandwich and carrot sticks. The pies seemed innocent, but inside their flaky shells lurked partially hydrogenated oils, the laboratory creation that gave processed foods their long shelf life and satisfying texture. Nobody warned families that these oils were loaded with trans fats, the kind that clogged arteries, raised bad cholesterol, and contributed to heart disease in ways scientists would only fully understand decades later. Mothers who packed these pies with love had no idea they were handing their children something that slowly chipped away at cardiovascular health. When regulators finally moved to ban trans fats, these pies became relics of a different era. Looking back, it is troubling to realize that a treat meant to bring joy carried consequences that took years to surface. Chlordane-soaked termite barriers were installed beneath foundations throughout the 1980s as the ultimate defense against wood-destroying insects. Pest control companies promised decades of protection, saturating soil with chemicals so persistent that termites would never tunnel through. Homeowners trusted these invisible shields completely, believing their investment would keep structural damage at bay forever. What nobody explained was that chlordane does not simply stay underground. It migrates slowly upward through cracks in concrete, through gaps around pipes, and through air circulating beneath floors. Families lived above these chemical pools for years, breathing vapors that accumulated inside tightly sealed houses designed to conserve energy. Children played on carpets directly over treated soil, and basements carried faint chemical odors people dismissed as normal. When researchers linked chlordane exposure to neurological damage and cancer risks, regulators banned it entirely for residential use. Homeowners were left wondering what had been seeping into their homes for years. Today, chlordane barriers remain troubling examples of how protection can turn into contamination without anyone noticing. Raw milk sold openly in grocery stores felt like a wholesome throwback during the 1980s, something that connected modern families to simpler dairy traditions their grandparents knew. Cartons sat beside pasteurized options, marketed as more natural, more nutritious, and closer to the way milk was meant to be consumed. Health enthusiasts praised its enzymes and unprocessed purity, believing heat treatment destroyed things that made milk beneficial. Families poured it over cereal, gave it to children, and used it in recipes without imagining any threat lurking inside. But raw milk carried bacteria that pasteurization was designed to destroy, including Salmonella, E. coli, and Listeria, organisms capable of causing severe illness or death. Outbreaks linked to unpasteurized dairy mounted as families fell sick, some suffering permanent damage while others did not survive. State after state began banning retail sales, and federal regulators prohibited raw milk from crossing state lines. The drink that symbolized natural living became a public health battleground. Today, it remains illegal in most places, a reminder that tradition and safety do not always walk together. Bologna sandwiches were the cornerstone of almost every lunchbox in the 1970s, slapped between two slices of soft white bread with a smear of mustard and wrapped in wax paper like a tiny gift. Mothers packed them believing they were giving their children something filling, affordable, and perfectly wholesome. The pink meat looked cheerful, tasted familiar, and satisfied hungry kids who never questioned what made it so conveniently uniform. But hidden inside every slice was a cocktail of sodium nitrates and nitrites, preservatives that gave the meat its rosy color and extended shelf life far beyond what nature intended. People trusted the packaging and the brand names without hesitation. What nobody talked about was how those preservatives, once inside the body, could transform into compounds researchers would later link to serious health concerns. By the time science caught up, generations of children had consumed countless sandwiches made from meat that carried risks no parent ever imagined. It is unsettling to think that something so trusted could have quietly posed a danger, hiding in plain sight. Carbon tetrachloride spot removers were tucked under laundry room sinks and inside cleaning closets throughout the 1980s, trusted solutions for stubborn stains nothing else could touch. The liquid worked almost magically on grease, ink, and mysterious marks on clothing, carpets, and upholstery. Families kept bottles handy, dabbing the clear solvent onto fabric and watching stains dissolve before their eyes. What nobody explained was that carbon tetrachloride converts to poison gas when it evaporates, and using it in poorly ventilated spaces could lead to dizziness, unconsciousness, or worse. People knelt over treated carpets, leaned into closets where freshly cleaned garments hung, and breathed deeply without knowing the risk. Some homeowners used it in enclosed bathrooms where air barely circulated. Emergency rooms saw poisoning cases difficult to diagnose because the source seemed ordinary. When regulators understood how dangerous this common cleaner was, the bans came quickly and permanently. Families discarded bottles they had relied on for years, aware that their stain fighter had been threatening their health. Today, carbon tetrachloride remains banned, a relic from when cleaning solutions could kill. Sodium cyclamate. Sweetened drinks were everywhere in the 1980s, filling refrigerators and vending machines with diet sodas that promised guilt-free refreshment. The artificial sweetener tasted remarkably close to sugar, lacked the bitter aftertaste of alternatives, and helped calorie-conscious consumers enjoy drinks without weight gain associated with regular soda. Families stocked cases of these beverages, and dieters relied on them as essential tools in weight management. The sweeteners seemed like a perfect solution to growing concerns about sugar and obesity. But cyclamate had already been banned in the United States back in 1969 after studies linked it to bladder cancer in laboratory animals. Despite ongoing debates about those findings, the ban remained firmly in place. Many consumers had no idea they were consuming something prohibited when they purchased imported products or traveled abroad. The controversy highlighted how differently nations approached food safety. Today, cyclamate remains forbidden in the United States, a quiet reminder that what tastes sweet can sometimes carry bitter consequences. Tang was the drink that made every child feel like an astronaut, the bright orange powder that transformed ordinary water into something that tasted like adventure itself. Mothers stirred it into pitchers, poured it into thermoses, and sent their children off believing they were providing something fun and refreshing. The marketing was brilliant, tying the drink to exploration, science, and the excitement of the future. But behind that cheerful orange glow was a list of artificial colors that would later raise serious questions about what children were consuming. Red dye, yellow dye, and other synthetic colorants gave Tang its signature brightness, and families never stopped to wonder what those chemicals might do once swallowed. Studies eventually connected artificial dyes to hyperactivity, attention issues, and behavioral concerns in children, prompting other countries to require warning labels or outright bans. American regulators moved more slowly, leaving parents to make decisions without the full picture. Today, the idea of sending a child to school with a thermos full of artificially colored sugar water feels like a relic from a time when trust in manufacturers outweighed caution. Every one of these products was sold as perfectly safe. If this changed how you see the decade, subscribe and tell us what you remember.